Hi, everybody, and welcome to SCA Coach's Corner Heroes and Traditions. I am one of your hosts, Jarl Alenon.
And I am Brennan of the East.
His Highness Brennan of the East. Don't let him get away with that humble. I'm Brennan of the East. So it's been a long break since we've had a Heroes and Traditions. And the last time we were with you, we were visiting with the Kingdom of Meridies. And the Kingdom of Meridies was the fifth kingdom. The sixth kingdom is Caid, and we are thrilled to have two amazing guests to join our stream with us tonight. First is Her Excellency Viscountess Larissa. Let's bring her in. Hello, Your Excellency, and welcome to our little stream.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The pleasure is definitely ours, and we will jump in with you in just a few minutes and ask you about how you got started and everything. But let's get in a slightly larger than life individual, His Grace Duke Guy of Castle Kirk. Duke Guy, thank you for joining us this evening.
Well, brother, it's my honor, and it's always been a great part of my life to be in the SCA, going on 48 years now. And I want everyone to know that all the stories you've heard about me are all true.
Yeah, I've got some amazing pictures to share with people in a little bit about why they call you of Castle Kirk, but we'll get to that in a bit. Why don't we start with Her Excellency Larissa, and why don't you tell us about how you got started in the SCA and about when that was and sort of what was going on in your world at that time?
First crown tournament that we was ever held. My parents went, and I was in utero. So the whole tournament sounded kind of watery and echoey. And then I was born April 4th, 1967, and been going to SCA events ever since. So people like to say, well, who brought you to your first SCA event? And I say, well, they used to strap me down and take me totally against my will, but it was my parents.
Yep.
So 55 years, it'll be 56 years this April. I've been doing this.
Wow. So you literally, even though you were, unborn, you were at the first tournament.
I was at
the first crown list.
Yes.
That's super cool. Cool. I bet you that journey kind of has played out really, really interesting, and we'll ask you a little bit more about that as we get going. But why don't we jump over to His Grace Guy? Guy, how did you get started in the SCA, and where were you? What were you doing?
Oh gosh, ever since I was a little boy, I've loved making swords and having toys of knights. And then I started building armor in junior high. My father was a metal sculptor, and so he helped me along through his shop. And then when I was a senior in high school, we were taking a modern mythology class, which was The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And we had time to read an extra book. And the one I chose was by Catherine Kurtz, The Dyrney Rising. And the teacher told me, oh, she's in a medieval society. And I just said, I have to do that. I went to the library and researched it and found a website for the page, or not a website, an address, and got a newsletter. And then Caid had two knights, Sir Hugh the Undecided and Sir Christian of Orange, when I joined up. And my first tournament was a coroneting tournament for Thomas the Merciless, who was also knighted there. And Andrew of Riga was King of the West. I remember he came down. And Duke Paul had a line of at least 20 fighters in front of him, and he was one-shotting them one after another. And I remember saying, who's that? And someone introduced me to him, and he gave me my first real lesson in the SCA. And it was in the year AS9, 1975. And that's, I could keep going, but my cousin of Caid, Larissa, has things to say too. I better stop.
We'll get to both of you and really sort of try to pick your history apart as we go. Brennan, where do you want to take us right now? I'm going to jump over onto the comments and see if anyone's there yet.
I don't see anything in the comments yet. So when you're starting in AS9, Your Grace, you said there's 2 nights. So Paul gives you a lesson, and as he has given so many folks over the years, where does it go from there? You're in high school. Do you go back home and you go back home and go where from there?
Oh, well, I got pretty good pretty quickly and was winning tournaments within a few months. But I remember driving to that first tournament saying, I am going to tear these guys up. And I was schooled. The old slow motion rising snap worked so well. There weren't any wraparounds then or Molyneux. But it was a big wake up for me. They let me fight with a pair of knee pads for leg armor. And I got a good look at armor there, and I went home, and by the next tournament, I had a pretty decent kit. And I remember everybody gathering around a Freon can delivery, brand new, with the expanded metal face, and gathering and saying, what a nice helmet. And I remember saying, hey, I could do something better than this. And another thing I talk about also is just the evolution of armor, pavilions, the whole atmosphere in the SCA, and how true it is now. And I often say, if the SCA had never been created, look at all the beautiful artwork that would have never been inspired. It might have been in other ways, but not to the volume we see today. There's beautiful work everywhere.
You take any one category, and I think that's true. Like the scribal work alone of the known world.
Yeah, yeah. It's
so what does a pretty cool set of armor look like in AS9? You said you started off with just a pair of knee pads, and then you built a pretty good set of armor. What does that look like when you're coming back around?
Oh gosh, shag carpet armor. I remember one big fella had like scales of orange shag carpet. It was symmetrical scales and really well laid out, but with his heavier lower end and the helmet he had on, he looked like Big Bird moving across the field. And I'll never forget that. But everybody pretty much had Freon can helmets then, and maybe a skirt of rigid material for leg armor. There was a lot of and then you'd have some nice kits too, like Duke Armand had the full head to toe Norman chainmail armor.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and it just there's good and there was good armor, and there was made up armor, whatever would work.
Hey, let's do a quick history side note here. One of our watchers has, said a newbie here, AS9. Your Excellency Larissa, why don't you quickly, I bet you can do this off the top of your head really easily. Can you describe what AS9 means and then kind of put that in terms of the Gregorian calendar for us?
Yeah, so Annus Societatis was the term that the heralds came up with using for the years of the SCA, starting with year 1 and going through, now we're in AS 57, right? Because there's only like a month where the SCA and I are like a year apart. But Annus Societatis was the term that they came up with to describe that. So the shortened version for all of us is AS, whatever the year is. So AS9 would have been 1970, 75, 76?
75.
75.
Yeah. Some of 74, I think, and then the majority of 75. Same, Your Excellency. I remember my own birthday by the age of the society and the what Super Bowl year it is. So,
That's a hallmark.
Well, it's funny because so I'm born April 4th. May 1st is when we change the AS. So from April 4th to May 1st, we're only a year apart. So I always have to remember to add 2 years. It's just, yeah.
So yeah, if you start going to events, you'll hear AS or Anna Societatis. However, different heralds from different kingdoms can pronounce that a little differently. But you'll hear that a lot in court when scrolls are being read. That is probably where you'll hear it most often, or sometimes then in sort of someone's talking about something that they did. They went to Penzic 13, which was at AS, and I don't even know what it was, but I think Penzic started 4, 5, 6 years maybe after the SCA started. So you have to do your own math there.
I think it's 8. We will have 7. We will have Penzic 50 this year. So
Penzic 50 this year. That's right. Yeah.
Right, but didn't we skip during COVID? Didn't they skip a year?
We 2.
2. Right. So it should be 52. So 3 years.
Yeah.
4 years after the SCA was 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
And just to bookend this, there's a question in the comments. Why don't we change to January? And that is based around when the society actually started, and the first tournament in Berkeley. So we date to that.
Well, the first tournament wasn't actually on May Day, but they picked May Day just as the rotating date.
Okay. And now I know.
Was that Beltane?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Your Excellency, you were young, being run around the Kingdom of the West, and when did, to your memory, do you remember, or through your research in history and preservation of history, did the Principality of Caid start to come into play?
1970. When we were leaving, 1971. It's funny because I actually have the document here that was given to Andrew of Riga to petition to become a principality.
Mm-hmm.
I have that scroll sitting in my living room, and I should have looked at that date before starting this event. But yeah, it was. I want to say 1970, 1969, 1970.
Okay.
Was
so you had somewhere around 15 or 16 principality reigns before you went kingdom?
No, we actually had we went kingdom. Well, the reason that the law that you have to be 18 years or older to be a monarch is because of me. And it's actually because we sign legal documents as monarchs. And we actually put the petition through to become a principality in 1977. They started that paperwork during my reign. And then someone on the board of directors was an actual contract attorney and went, "How old is this person?" And they told him, and he went, oh, no. So that was put off from Martin Neptha's reign, which was 1978. So yeah, we became a kingdom in 1979, 1980 was the petition went through, and then our first crown tournament, which Duke Armand won. So
okay, yeah, I have the order of precedence with regards to the royalty, but not the or the crown royalty, but not the principality royalty in front of me. So I'll have to just use your brain for that. So cool. So what year did you reign exactly? Was it in 77, 78?
It was in the spring of 77. So I was 9 years old when Balin won coronet tourney, and I had a birthday right in between, and then I was crown princess at 10.
And had you been fought for before that, or was that the first time you had been fought for in a
No,
principality list?
that was the first time I'd ever been fought for, period.
Okay.
Balin and I became friends at one of the Estrella Wars, but it wasn't Estrella yet. It wasn't Catbox. I'm trying to remember which war it was.
Burrow
But
Creek.
we became really good friends. And his girlfriend at the time was in the Navy, and she shipped out before Coronet Tourney happened. And he wanted to fight in it, and she said, "Well, you can fight for somebody who's safe." And it can be safer than a 10-year-old. So he asked my parents, and they said, "Sure." Here was this, 19, 20-year-old guy. They'd never seen him fight before. It was going to be adorable.
So, what are your early memories of what fighting was like in the tourneys on the field at war? Because you said you were going to Estrella before it was Estrella. You know, I think you might have a really interesting perspective because as a non-adult, you might see things a little differently. But also, as someone who'd been in the SCA your whole life, I mean, what could be more normal than just going to an SCA event?
Right. Well, we had neighbors that used to sit out on their front porch on Saturday mornings to see what we came out in. Because we always left in garb for events because there was almost never time to change at events. And so SCA stuff, we were clowns for the Special Olympics, science fiction. So, I mean, it was, but I remember the carpet being really fascinating. People would tie like shower rugs to their legs for leg armor, and lots of carpet armor, Freon cans, lots of even to this day, people would go get street signs, traffic signs, and use them as armor. They would cut them apart to make scales, which of course made the Kyrgyz's job super fun because now there were all these sharp metal parts as well. And things like the first mace in the SCA was a roll of toilet paper attached to a thin rattan stick and then duct taped thoroughly. It was like being hit by a truck. It was insane. Sir Robert Dubois was one of the first people to do an actual pole arm. And we took it to Pennsic 6. I was princess, so a bunch of Caidins went to Pennsic 6. And he took it, and it was the first time anybody'd seen anything over 4 feet. But yeah, the armor has definitely evolved. There you go, right? And the fun thing about the Freon cans is that seam around the middle would constantly split. So people would be, before hold came along, stop, of course, was the word that was used. And there'd be lots and lots of stops because people could see splits developing in the Freon cans that the fighters couldn't feel. Padding in the helmets came along pretty quickly because if you've ever worn one of those and been hit, if the padding's not right, it's like living inside a bell. It's just ridiculous. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. People quickly got very good at making tabards to cover the armor because some of it was not pretty.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then we've gotten to the point now where like some of the later period armor with all the fluting and stuff is ridiculous, gorgeous, but like holy mackerel, you're gonna wear that onto a field and let people hit you? What's wrong with you? And then the fighting was very much. It was in the early days. There was a lot of thug fighting. It wasn't very artistic. People hadn't really come up with training shots yet. Paul was one of the first people that really introduced that. And then Greyhelm, we were very lucky in that we had some really fluid guys in Caid, where it wasn't so much just slugging the guy as getting in there and trying to land shots behind shields as opposed to just going at them and running and hitting as hard as you could. It was more like strategic, and then that got more and more evolved as time went on.
Now, does any of that turn into training? So you have these folks that are, as you're saying, being more fluid and trying to put their shots with precision rather than just power. How does that? What's the training looking like at this early stage? Either Your Excellency or Your Grace want to weigh in here.
Uh, this question is to me now.
It sure can
Either
be.
of you that want, sure can.
Uh, well, I still just run at people and try to hit them as hard as I can. So I haven't changed. No, no,
I can attest to this,
no, the
but he's real
evolution of
good at that.
it's just how fast it is now, and how, like Larissa said, how fluent combinations can develop into, and the 100-day challenge on the Pell, that's seen a lot of people improve. Um, there's no substitute for having good cardio. You have to have that good cardio going, or then it's not fun to be exhausted and all of a sudden have the tide turn against you. And that's one thing I've always tried, but that's left me. It's I'm 65 now, and I still have fun at it, but it's not like it used to be. I'm starting to take it more than I give it to the really good fighters, unless it's first 2 minutes on the field. But I'll always love it, and I'll still be out there poking away with a spear like William of Houghton, Duke William of the West Kingdom. I remember he'd go back and rest, close his eyes, stand there with his spear, and then open his eyes and head back to the front for about 5-10 minutes. But it's been a long road, and I have fought many great fighters. I haven't the Herald calls, but the one man I never fought but I saw him fight was Duke Inman from Onstiora. You've heard the name. He's a black belt in karate, and it really showed too. He did some leaps and twists.
Well, Paul, same thing. I mean, Paul.
I've been fortunate enough to fight His Grace Inman.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a while ago I saw him.
I think that's what Paul brought really to the SCA, was because he had a black belt in like 4 different martial arts, and he looked at it way more from a strategic standpoint than anybody else had, I think, up until that point. And so he brought more of like, when you practice Pell, you want to hit it this way and then bring it around this way. And it was more starting to connect moves, starting to connect blows, and moving your feet, right? Going out and actually moving out of the other person's shot as you throw a shot, and some of that stuff. And I remember as a kid watching the fighters practice that, because of course we had a big house in LA, and then the house next door to us went up for rent, and a bunch of fighters moved in there and rented it. So trying to date when you've got a bunch of fighters in the front yard practicing on a Pell, by the way, not great. But just watching them move and watching how it changed, how it just went from hacking at somebody to rotating the hand and bringing up shots and moving your feet and side swiping and really practicing on targeted areas as opposed to just hitting the guy. And I know he made a comment on here because I can see it, but Christopher of Houghton was one of the prettiest fighters to watch in his day. And it's funny how he got a lot of his dad's movement, but he also worked on all of his own. He's very willowy as opposed to his dad, and so his movement was just incredible. Karayadaka the Bow was another one where you hear this little tiny guy came in to fight people, and the way he moved was kind of a Jackie Chan meets the Tasmanian Devil. Was kind of like, he was just so fast. And when people came up against him for the first time he went to Pensick, people were like, what the heck? Like, what? Like, who is this guy? So, yeah, watching that evolution of fighting change. And it started to change back to how hard can we hit people again. But I've noticed over the last 5 years, it's going back towards like teaching people like, okay, you can hit somebody hard. That's great. But if you don't have defense, if you can't connect your shots, if you can't move, it's not going to do you very good. So that's nice to see that coming back in.
So when do you see the flip from watching these fighters next to you or in the house next door to you? When do you see the flip from just the hack away to the fluid connected blows and starting to think about this more as a martial art than maybe just a stunt we're doing?
I think honestly, it happened Hugh the Undecided was one of our first princes, and he also had some martial arts training, and he really, when he went out onto the field, watching him was just really pretty. You know, it went from, again, just two guys smacking at each other with swords to just being really pretty. And then we started spending more time up in the West, and Paul started coming down to train people. And I think that changed a lot of it. And because the SCA was doing science fiction conventions and tournaments and, you know, stuff out in parks, there was a big thing, because remember, Kung Fu and all of that stuff, Bruce Lee, all started to hit right about the beginnings of the SCA. And so we got a bunch of martial arts people in the SCA that were like, well, this is kind of cool, right? So let's go try this. And so I think that made a huge influence. But I remember as early, I mean, I was 5 when I saw Hugh fight for the first time, and I just thought that was amazing. So that was 1973. So I mean, it happened pretty early on, and people wanted to. The whole Arthurian thing, right, was a huge influence. So people wanted it to not just who was going to win, but also be pretty.
Right. So thinking, not just in a question of how pretty is it, but what does the training look like? And I'll pose this to Your Grace. What does the training look like from the older generation of fighters to the folks who are coming up? Is it show up on Wednesday night and we're just going to hit each other until we get good? Is there somebody that's leading a practice and teaching drills? What does training look like in, I'll call it, the mid to late 70s?
Well, I've always been a big believer on whatever you can come up with to open that door. You know, let your mind expand. The shield is a door with hinges on all 4 sides, and sometimes it's got an axle in the middle. The thought of thinking up new blows that we've seen over all these years, and then people refining those. I in practices, I will score on someone and say, do you know what I did to you there? And then I show them the move, and I'll do it again in like a 3/4 speed. So you see what I'm doing here? I go, now you do it, and I turn it around, and I'll do the same. Let them do the same move to me half a dozen times and give them corrections on it. And what you're talking about, I wanted to mention in fluid fighting is when, I'm sure you guys have experienced this, when you're fighting a really good fighter and you fall into a cadence with them where you're both throwing blows and picking up. You're not tangling up and throwing 15, 20 blows each and then coming out clean. I think one of those fights is worth 100 others, just win or lose, just to feel that exhilaration. Duke Torkill and I have had a couple of those. And people are so shocked they forgot to push the record button on the video because it's just so amazing. And we're both of our eyes are this big around, and we're just screaming. But he got me last time. He's one up on me.
Well, I have no doubt you'll get that one back. Thinking about the way you're talking about training, where you stop and say, Now you know what I did to you there, and you show the person. Um, who was doing that with you when you were coming up? Who was the one saying, uh, "This is how I killed you, guy," and letting you do it back to them?
Well, it's got to be that smiling Mahi McFergie. That was he was always a great coach of benefit with just his optimism and praise.
Okay.
Uh, I think that's much more important than criticizing people. Is saying, yeah, you could improve on this, but what you're doing here, showing this kind of even just the drive, how that can be praised to want to be better. I'm sure we've all seen people that really weren't athletic in high school find out about the SCA and then bump it up to a big level of athletic prowess on the field. I know a few people that just started off, not athletic at all, and then with just jumping rope, working out, and winning crown tournaments. And I said, good on you. I had a training machine, I guess you'd call it, out at the castle. The back acre, I had two posts in the ground with about 140 foot of cable, 3/8 cable, and I had a front end of a pulley wheel on it. I had the front end of a bicycle on it for my kids, and they grabbed the handlebars for a big slide. But I tie that to the side, and I had a pulley with a chain leader to a piece of like 8-inch telephone pole that was no, 6-inch. 6-inch, 7-inch telephone pole that went from the head to the knee, and I would shield press it to the top of the hill, turn around and let it go, and I would chase it down the hill, throwing combinations at it. I'd press it up the hill again for cardio. I would back pedal down the hill and step aside, throw that nice sweet wrap to the leg as it came by. And then when it got into the swale at the bottom, if you got a piece of land with a hill on it, a slight hill, this was so good for me because I'm like 200 miles from Central Caid, and that's where the talent was when I was heavily into the SCA. So this was a very good combat by proxy. When the Pell would get down into the swale of the cable where it was neutral, it would start jumping around like 3 or 4 foot each way and 2 or 3 feet high and unpredictable. So you had to wear a helmet with your sword and shield because it'd come and get you. But I really owe that to my winning crown tournaments and being a great fighter at the time. And it was just a great aerobic Pell. I'd let it go
Sounds
down.
very rocky.
I'd run sideways next to it, throwing blows and whatever you can do.
I don't think fighter practices really started until the early 80s. I think groups of guys would get together, or households would get together, like within a household they would get together. Like Dragons Keep the House Next Door would just all decide on a Sunday or a Thursday night or whatever to get together and practice on the Pal and practice with each other. And of course they would invite friends or new people to come do it. But I don't think we had anything super formal until the very early 80s. And most of the time, like, it was war bands, here, household war bands here in Caid would get together and fight, but it wasn't really so we had collegiums, or ithras as they were called in the very early day, college things, and we would ask Paul or James Graham or Andrew or Houghton to come teach fighting classes at them.
Okay.
And I think we were one of the first colleges that did that in the West. It was a West Caid thing. So yeah. And we still have combat classes. I'm sure now they're very popular in the SCA, but it was really just within your own private group did teaching happen.
Okay.
So
thinking about one of the things that His Grace mentioned was that there was the strongholds of talent within Caid. Being an East Coast guy myself, where are those, or where at this time were those strongholds of talent, and who, and what made them? Was it just population centers, or were they nucleus around a great fighter and then his squires? Maybe what made it?
It was really population areas for us. San Diego, Los Angeles, the Orange County area, those were all really big areas where, we had hot sticks, is what we like to call them. Ooh, there's a hot stick down there. San Diego especially had, San Diego is sort of the hub of all the military stuff in Southern California and Southern California. So we had a lot of guys that would come in on transfers. We had a lot of East Coast guys that would come in and Southern guys that would come in. And so the San Diego area was a great area to go to learn how to fight from people.
Awesome. So thinking about then the sum total of the 70s, we're going to play my favorite game,
Oh, no.
which is no, it's not that bad. I promise. It's who won the decade. So thinking about this is a largely fighter centric question, but if you want to take it in a different direction, go ahead. In terms of prowess, influence, just the mark that they've left on Caid, who won the 70s?
Oh gosh, I would have to think Martin the Temperate, and Martin the Temperate and Gregory of York were the two
Okay.
dukes.
So I don't know either of these gentlemen. Tell me why.
Well, Gregory and I started at the same time. I remember that, and he really got good quickly, and won principality or became Prince of Caid in first or second year of fighting. He's just always a solid fighter, always in the finals. Same with Martin the Temperate, and he's from the Isles, which is Santa Barbara, and he was a great solid fighter himself. And I saw Gregory at 50 year, but I haven't seen Martin in quite a while. It'd be good to see him again, and that's always a great thing too. And you see old veterans show up at an event. The SCA is always there. It's always there, and just talk the old stories. It's just good to see old friends you used to cross swords with 40 years ago, and still good friends. It's really something. But Larissa, do you have any? Balin was really great in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, he made a 10-year-old princess. I would say that I agree with Martin and Gregory both, but Hugh the Undecided, who was one of our first princes, was just an amazing fighter. And even though he didn't go on to ever become king, the people that he trained and the legacy that he left was huge. Gregory is always going to be a favorite of mine because he was my princess's champion. And he was one of the guys. He would drive up from San Diego and then meet us in Hollywood at my house. And then we would all drive up to Big Trees to go to Western events. And he was just always willing to train people, always there. And Balin was one of his squires. So that legacy also continued on. So yeah, I would say probably those three.
So looking at OP, it looks like Martin was your first duke, homegrown duke, and Armand the second, and Gregory right behind him. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, very cool. And sorry, everyone, for my technical issues.
Yeah.
New computer doesn't always mean perfect. It just means new. Anything else on the follow up of who won the decade there, Brendan, or do we want to move on to the 80s?
I think we're on to the 80s.
All right. Well, put your new wave skinny ties on and flock of seagulls hair, and let's jump into the 80s.
And who the great fighters were then?
Well, yeah. I can look at OP, and
Yeah.
OP tells us that the Gregory was the first Duke of the 80s, and then you had, I believe, Adrian and Jason following along with that, and it looks like Adrian is winning quite a bit in through there. Guy, you win. Are you the guy that's in 1984,
No,
or is that a
I was
different guy?
yeah, that was Guy de Coldrake. But
Guy.
I was his Queen's champion, Queen Troy. And that was a very exciting time. There was Sir Kip Silverlock was the king when I dropped out of the SCA for 2 years while I started Castle Kirk. And I came back, he was the king, and he was a good, solid fighter. Also, Ivan the Illustrated in the 80s really came on, and Duke Avery of Kempsford was a great Caid fighter. Sir Freewind, he never won crown, but he was just he was just a very flamboyant fighter with a Madhu, the first Madhu fighters, and he and I had some of those sustained great fights. I miss him. He passed away last year. Yeah, that's another thing too. We lose our friends, the people we've known for years and years in the SCA, and we're all we're all gonna go. And it's just been a great history, and it's expanding all the time. Like when Larissa and I started, there were 4 kingdoms. They just cut the United States down 4 vertical lines. Oh, and I think Stuart. No, Adenvelt was a separate kingdom.
Yep.
No.
Yep.
So we did. The West was our first episode that we did, and then we did the East, and then we did the Middle, and then we did Atenvelt, which was the 4th kingdom, and then there was Meridies, and Caid follows very quickly. So I think that's our order of kingdoms as they came about.
Yeah.
I would have to say for the 80s, Duke Armand, our first king, and he was amazing. And Gregory, again, interestingly enough, Gregory went to the West and won crown for Catherine Kurtz, Bevan of Fraser, and then came back down and won crown for his girlfriend at the time. Because, of course, the West doesn't have any, you don't have to live in the West to be king of the West. Whereas in Caid, you have to live in Caid to be king of Caid. Martin, again, was very strong. Jason, who later became Richard, was also a very strong fighter, fast, really fast, and could hit like a ton of bricks when he wanted to.
Can I ask you a question? So if Gregory, he won his first crown in the West, and then his first reign in 1979 in Caid, that was his second reign. So I guess he would technically be your first Duke.
Well, yeah.
I mean, having won at least one crown as part of that duchy.
Right. Yeah. And he was, again, he was one of those guys that you could pull over and he'd be more than happy to help train you and walk you through stuff.
Well, can you kind of describe, how he fought, what kind of shield, how long, it's little details, little flavor for both, maybe him and Gregory. I mean, did they fight with long swords or short swords? Did they fight with big heaters? What do you remember?
Gregory was one of the first people I remember who fought with a round shield. And I remember thinking that was so cool because, of course, I grew up with Asterix and Obelix and Hagrid. And so that's, to me, that was like the Viking thing was the round shield, right? It was like, But I hadn't really seen one yet. And then Gregory showed up with one. He had been fighting with a heater. Almost everybody fought with a heater back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had the round shield, and that was like, and people were like, "Oh, you're gonna miss those corners." But Gregory was super fast. Again, lanky guy, right? Just really could move in there, and he could protect himself, but more to the point, he could get out of the way of the shot. And he was sort of the king of moving and throwing at the same time. And he was just really fun to watch fight as well, but could also hit like a ton of bricks when he needed to. Like he could pull up the power when he needed to, but he didn't really. I mean, I don't ever remember hearing anybody complain about Gregory hitting too hard.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he needed to. So Balin learned from Gregory, and he was super fast. And same thing, would move around a whole lot. And I don't remember, I'm trying to remember who the Duke, we had a Duke come out from the East, and he showed up to a Calafian event, and he managed to pull both Gregory and Balin aside. And I remember him saying, "Man, you guys move around a lot." And they were like, "Well, yeah, the best way to not get hit is to not be there." It's just like, so, and I remember, Armand, of course, had the chainmail suit that he still wears the same chainmail suit, by the way, when he comes out. It's amazing that the thing has lasted this long. And Armand was just, again, one of those fighters that would move constantly when you fought him. And I think that was sort of a Caid thing. I think that just sort of became a thing that happened, right? Where people would just, in Caid, move a lot. But we were being trained by guys whose whole policy was, if you're not in where the shot was supposed to land, you're not going to get hit.
Here, Grace, what can you tell us about this cool picture you have?
Yeah, that was a publication out of the LA Times in 1976, so AS10. And that's Sir Hugh the Undecided with his back to us. That was the standard on guard then. And that's my first armor I ever built. And we'd sew pockets in a pair of pants and slide some plates in them for the thigh. It really worked great. Yeah.
So you both have strapped round shields in this picture?
You can see my cautious approach. Yeah, strapped on round shields. And today, Duke Adam, he just became a Duke in Caid. He still uses a strapped on round shield. It's I haven't seen that in a while, and he's really good at it. He really uses a very unpredictable fighter. That's the word I use for him.
So that the sword guard that Hugh is using back east, we would call that a high castle. Did you guys have a name for that here in the Western kingdoms?
What, the basket hilt?
Well, where the sword's pretty much going straight down.
Yeah, high castle. No, I'm not sure. Well draped.
We used to call it the chicken arm.
Yeah, well, Hugh also he built all his own armor, and he would have workshops for the fighters. We had a brotherhood called the Brotherhood of the Blade. I remember going over to his house a few times and doing like assembly line workshops with him, building things. He's really encouraging. A great man. I haven't seen him in 40 years, 30 years. It'd be great to see him again.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, that was me. Probably my third event or so. And
now I'm thinking about.
I'll guarantee you, Hugh beat me pretty good right there. Yeah, he's a great fighter.
Thinking about that high castle guard, firing from back here, it feels to me, not having ever spent any time in that guard, like what you're throwing is really 3 shots, like an overhead, a flat snap, and a leg. Is there anything else that you guys are doing at that point?
That's all there was then. There weren't any wraparounds or Milanese or coming over to the inside to the offside thigh was getting fancy. But
Okay.
that was the standard on guard then. And another thing too is they really can't see where your blade is.
Right.
So when they see that
Bring the
hand coming,
you bring the shield
the
up a
blade,
little bit and hide it, right? You know, and
yeah, that blade would be the last thing you'd see. So yeah, you got, like you said, the three options coming off of that one
Well,
on
and for
guard
a
there.
lot of our fighters, that's how they started their rising snap.
Yeah, like
Was from the high guard position.
Whoa!
All the way down and bring it all the way back up.
You see it a mile away.
Wow, that's a big waste of energy, you guys.
Wow. All right. As I'm playing those fights in my head, that there's an evolution certainly to the sport there. Is there so who breaks out of that trend of that high castle guard, and because it feels like when you break out of that, there's going to be an evolutionary jump that happens. So who's
Right.
the one helping y'all find that next evolution?
I think it's just a combined effort of many fighters coming up with new blows over the years. You know, I've always Sir Mahi McFergie. He was the fourth knight of Caid, I believe, right after Thomas. And
So,
yeah, and he would always say he's Irishman, and he'd say, "Hey lad, you gotta watch the hand that's gonna kill you, and just keep an eye." That was his idea: just watch that sword hand constantly, and that was his whole philosophy. I myself, I hide my weapon behind my shield. I wave it around on approach. Anything, if you can confuse or put some doubt in your opponent's mind, indecision, it's the robber of speed. So if you can just for a moment, take his mind off of his game, then he's playing your game. But those little windows open and close very quickly. So anything new that they haven't seen in an on guard stance, any indecision like that, being flamboyant and unpredictable, that's a big advantage to a sword fight. I've always thought.
I think the first person I know of that never used the high guard was Sir Robert Dubois. And the reason I know he never used it was he was epileptic and he built a birdcage helm. It was literally made out of the small chicken wire and welded bars. It sat like a deep diver's helmet on his shoulders, and it stood out. He was 6'4", is 6'4", but it stood out a good 6 to 7 inches. Even with his long arms, I know he never sat with his sword up behind his helmet. I know that for a fact. And that may have actually been one of the reasons why he preferred to fight when he could polearm. But he did go out sword and board, and he was my first knight. He was the first person I squired to, and I don't ever remember him going into a high guard, ever. And he moved in next door to us before I became princess, so that was 1975, 76. So.
Hey,
so
I'm the first one.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm not really proud of this. So just because of the name of the defense, but I was the first one to charge in, and I put the tip. Where am I here? I put the tip of the sword on the corner of my shield, and charge in, and the sword was resting against my shield, and then it was a very sound way to get inside, so you could pummel. But they called that the Iron Chicken, and said, "Hey, you can't do that because the sword theoretically would break if it was resting against the tip was resting against the shield." But
you created the anviling rule?
Yeah, is that anviling? You call that
anviling?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my claim to fame.
Well, not your only, buddy. Hey, here's a question I have for. I'll start with Guy. I know from Adam's and mine's perspective, as we're talking to other as we've talked to the other kingdoms, one of the things they've shared to us a lot was how, fighting would get a little stagnant, and then either somebody would come in, or you guys would go to a war, or there would be, let's go to another king, let's all go to another kingdom for a little while, and then it would bring back new ideas and new thoughts and stuff. Were you guys always pretty back and forth with the West? I mean, there wasn't a giant wall between Southern and Northern California, so you guys always had pretty much was whatever was going on in the West, you were picking up, and then you said you had those early Estrellas, so that was also probably another opportunity to kind of get some international flavor to your fighting.
Oh yeah, constantly. I learned. I remember really learning a lot from the Antir when I was at Estrella. Duke Torgal, just Duke Skeggy. Always something new there. The Outlands, yeah, whatever develops. What you mentioned about stagnation. I tell fighters, hey, if you feel like you've plateaued or you're stagnant, pick up a mace, go Florentine, pick up a halberd or Danish axe, and force yourself into that discipline, and you'll see yourself launch right out of a plateau. It's something you have to do. You can't stay. If you feel like you're plateauing, that's mentally defeating you right there. So you got to launch out of it. You got to do something to get out of that.
Shake things up, right?
Yeah.
We used to tell people to get in their cars and drive, because go fight someone you haven't fought before.
Yeah.
And what you mentioned about wars were always the pickup fights there are what I really look forward to. And again, yeah, you're fighting greatness from all over the country, all over the known world, and learning things, and teaching things.
So,
go ahead, Brandon. Yeah.
Is there somebody, just following up on the last question, is there somebody that comes into Caid that is that shot in the arm that
yeah, at a Great Western War, there's a Duke Alric that came from the East Kingdom, and he was this was 20 years ago, and no, 25 years ago, and he was the new fighter in Caid, and I'd heard about him, and he'd heard about me for a month or two. Like I said, I'm isolated up north. And we see each other at Estrella. My squire says, there he is. We walk over, and he had some people with him, and exchanged our pleasantries. And that's something we laugh about today, where I said, okay, you got to remember something here. I'm really old. And he goes, okay, guy, and I'm really slow. So he was doing things. He was doing an inside Moline using the inside edge of the sword, snapping his wrist. And when I went inside on him, and just creased me here. And I said, I'd never seen that one before. And then after a while, I figured him out. But he was a professional tennis player at one time. So that really explained the wrist snaps like I've never seen before, using a 40-inch sword too. And yeah, that was a big wake up for me right there. And again, that being in Kingdom, I hope he gave everybody else a shot in the arm too, as he did I on that day.
I hate to say that 25 years ago was recent, but it is fairly recent historically. It sounds like, I think you're talking about George, right?
Yeah,
he came in from Atlantia, because I knew him as a squire when he was in Atlantia. So let's finish up kind of, because we like to kind of try to, as best we can, keep things in sort of a decade kind of perspective. And we've moved through a little bit of the early 80s. A couple of guys I'd like to ask about, from their period in the 80s. Well, let me just start with Avery. Why don't you guys, if you can, share some memories or thoughts about how Avery fought, and what he was bringing to the fighting table.
Well, he was left-hander. He and I still to this day we're good friends, and he would fight very low in a squat position and move very well. And so I nicknamed him Lobster Legs. And that was his technique on getting, when you are squatted down like that, there's very little leg target to block, and you're giving up. And this is, the scorpion wrap can get you. Oh boy, I still remember that one. But Avery was always a very fluent fighter and very good with the spear too in war situations, and had a great looking kit with like a British, Anglo-British or Anglo-Roman body armor, and had one of my helmets on, and it really looked great.
Larissa, in this period here of,
I lost you.
I think we all lost.
Sometimes we have a tendency just to go back and look at, we go back and we look at OP and whatnot, and we don't see, we may miss some really great fighters because they may not have won crown during this period. But is there anyone that sort of stands out that wasn't necessarily a crown winner during this decade?
We had Sir Brian Sahu Apluellen, who was a little tiny guy, and he was just wicked fast, just really fast. Sir Lasarian was also really, really fast. We just lost him. During the 80s, we had a sudden influx of younger fighters, 18, 19-year-olds that just found the SCA and were ready to go. And a lot of them were just really, really, really fast guys. Freeman was one of them. He was just redonkulously fast. And then we had just some really good teachers. By then Sir Robert had become Baron here in one of our baronies, and he was still teaching people how to fight and how to fight polearm. A lot of our older fighters were still around teaching. We had two really big households in Calafia, Droffen, and the Abbey, where we had lots of, Mishwa was one of our really great fighters, and he was, again, wicked, wicked fast. Never won a crown tourney because he said he didn't want to do that much work. So yeah, we had an influx of really great people that came in and helped evolve the SCA even further, and were super helpful to the younger people too that came in and really worked with them. Kip and Guy, and even though they had won crowns, they never won them. They never got a second time because it was too, it was a lot for the first time, and they were just kind of over it. They were done. It wasn't something that they wanted to continue doing, but they still continued to teach, which was great. We got people from other kingdoms. Sir Torin O'Shea from Aytenvelt came in, and he's one of those fighters where he has a crushed ankle that was never repaired properly. So if you took his leg out, he was way more comfortable on his knees, and that was a big mistake. He fought better on his knees than anybody other than Hugh the Undecided I've ever seen. And so we got some of those guys in, and it was just really great to have all of the new people and all of the new stuff in. And technology had changed, right? There was a new thing called kinetics. Let's talk about how you move and how to make that better, and how your different body types work. We had really big guys training little tiny guys up until the 80s. And all of a sudden people realized, oh, hey, maybe some of the smaller guys should train some of the smaller guys, because they know how their body moves and how to get that flow out of smaller mechanics. So
you mentioned, you mentioned earlier that it's not until the 80s that the fighter practice really develops. So what happens in the 80s that starts that, or what does the practice look like once it gets going?
Well, it really started, I think, with a lot of the baronial and shire meetings where we held them in people's houses, but if the house had a backyard big enough, then the fighters would come too and fight. So we'd have the meeting, and then there'd be kind of like a party and people to hang out and there'd be fighting. And that just got to be, once it got too big to be in people's houses, then it started happening in people's parks. Well, there's a park down the street. We'll just go do fighting in the park. I don't know what the BART station in Oakland will ever do if the SCA starts having fighter practices in a park up there, because I think they're the only thing keeping crime out of that BART station. But it's like, that started to evolve, and then it got less into a party and more into people being really serious about training. Like, let's, hey, you're having problem keeping your shield arm up. Let's talk about that. Like, you're holding it wrong. You need to do this. You need to do that. And it became more about body mechanics, I think, as the 80s progressed on, where people realized, if you just throw from your shoulder all the time, you're going to tear your shoulder and elbow up, right? But if you use your whole body in it, then that spreads some of that around your body, and you're not just going to tear that one part of your body up.
So is that one person really preaching that gospel, or is it one person running the practice and it sort of forms around them? Does it look like just sparring? Is it drills? What does that look like in the 80s?
I don't think the drills really started until the early 90s, to tell you the honest God truth. I think mostly it was the fighters that knew how to fight for a really long length of time and were really successful, took it upon themselves to train some of the fighters that weren't. And some of those fighters would just walk up to Duke Armand or Duke Martin or whatever and be like, hey, how do I get where you are? And they would start to train them. And then then we started, really fighting in wars as a kingdom as opposed to individual groups that went to the war. And so then it became training, and practices and stuff like that. But it was really more about, hey, I want to know how you do that. Teach me how to do that. And then people would stop what they were doing and watch. And then it became well, you're left-handed, so we either need to change your body mechanics, or wait, hang on, let me go get this guy who's also left-handed and find out how he does it. And then it became less of a, big Duke so-and-so is going to come teach everybody how to do it, and more of a community thing, more of a, we're all going to help each other out. I mean, don't get me wrong. If big Duke so-and-so comes down, everybody's still like, okay, let's watch him. That's not like,
sure.
But.
So what is the war that y'all are training for? Like, here in the East, we're training for Penzik. What's the war that drives that unit training that you said started to happen?
It was Estrella, and we in the 80s we had started the West Caid Wars. So we had started to have meetups with the West where we would train for that, and it got really weird too. It's one of the reasons we don't have the war anymore, and it's one of the reasons that Caid doesn't do war points in our wars, because people got really angry and they got super aggressive, and people were getting hurt and feelings were getting hurt, and it wasn't just like personal feelings; it was like across the kingdom.
This sounds familiar to me. Go on.
Right. And so we decided, having been to a lot of events, so we decided that what, we really wanted to do was we wanted to go out and kill our friends, but not hurt our friends. Right. Like, we wanted people to come and have a good party and play and do stuff. And when we first started the West Caid Wars, they were really, really fun. And then it got really, really serious, and I'm not really sure where the fun slipped away and it became really serious. But when we started Great Western War, which is the current war we host, it was like, we're not going to do war points. We're not, people who want to come play arts and sciences will play arts and sciences. People want to fight will fight. Like, we're not gonna do that. And it seems to have helped, but mainly it was Estrella and West Caid War. We had
Okay.
Caidans go to Pensick, but that didn't really start as a big influx until about the late 1990s, early 2000s.
Okay. And so what does the unit training look like? Because I am a Penzic kid, and so melee speaks to my dirty little Penzic heart. Um, what does the unit training look like?
Guy, you want to talk?
Oh, yeah. Well, in the 80s, we would fight at the first Estrellas. We go to Estrella, and Aidenville camped on one side of the park, and we camped on the other. And we reveled with our allies, and they reveled with theirs. There's very little interaction between us except on the battlefield, and that's that the competition, the animosity that starts coming out, and in just like in any sport, any hard competitive sport. But then something happened. Gosh, I have these great friends from Aidenville now. We're all friends, and it just ruined everything. Yeah.
So when you're
On drilling though, we would show up at Estrella, and Trelon was king, and he would use the same tactic: 12 men around the edge, 12 men around, another 12, another 12, and then roll our flank. And then we had enough of that, and I was able to win that crown tournament in the 80s. That the army of Caid became formulated for the real army, and we'd have over 200 people at a war practice going through drills. Balin would march us. He was Larissa's prince. He was a Green Beret for 8 years and has really studied military techniques and tactics. Armand and he put together an army into geographical sections. So San Diego, Calafia, the Barony of Calafia would have their own practice. And there were 5 different brigades geographically positioned. And we would have our brigade, we'd have 50 people at a war practice. I remember we had a big Kingdom War practice in Central Caid in Angels there. And we had 250 fighters at a war practice getting ready for Estrella. And then from all our drilling that we did also to see the plan on the whiteboard in the Royal Pavilion War Council the night before, and the next day actually see it work exactly like it did on the board. In the early days, I remember lining up, I had a squad of about 12 fighters, and in the half hour before the battle, have 3 different Knights of Caid come up to me and tell me to do something different with my men, and so sir so and so just told us to do this. Well, never mind what he said. And we would stand there and get flanked. That was so I think, and then the West would take it to us also. So I think having that kind of a geographical brigade set up where you weren't traveling very far to get together, 30, 40, 50 guys for practice, and then going through the drills that Balin dictated to us really, really works. Hard work pays off. I've always said that. Have a shop sign. Hard work pays off. And that goes for sword fighting too, and organizing an army. And once you get that rolling, once you get an organized army rolling and successful war practices, there's no stopping it. You just get a great feel of camaraderie and accomplishment, and it rides through the whole army, and it's just a great feeling.
Larissa, anything you remember about that training that from the 80s that Guy didn't touch on?
No, I mean, he pretty much covered it. The each war band or brigade had its own style, and you knew who was going to be able to do what. really well. For us, the Abbey had, like, in the 80s, had the amazing shield wall, right? You know how you guys always have that one unit that has, like, I know at Pensick, Callantyr shield wall. There you go, right? Like, but same thing in the Kingdom. The Abbey shield wall was great. Droffen had really strong polearm units down in San Diego. The Brotherhood of the Blade up here had kind of one of everybody, and they were an excellent strike unit. Like, they were, once we got a path in, Brotherhood of the Blade ran in and started clearing people out from the back. Worked really well. We didn't really start brigades again until the late 90s. It was pretty much just either fighting units or households that came together to be. I think the Iron Brigade in Calafia was the first actual brigade where they got a bunch of the fighting groups together and formed one big brigade to fight.
Great.
So, yeah.
Eleanor, anything from you before we dive into my favorite game?
No, I just want to know who's making that wonderful barking sound.
Oh, that's my Danny.
I'm like, it's not mine. Mine are actually quiet.
He sounds amazing.
Yeah, he's my buddy. All right. So let's play my favorite game. Who won the 80s? Thinking about so we're gonna start the 80s with Martin II as king, and run through until we have closing out the 80s with our very own Guy II. Thinking about that decade, be it the best fighter, the most influential. I'll ask you to start, Guy. Who won the 80s in Caid? Guy is a perfectly valid answer.
So glad things don't change, Guy.
Well, one, the best style point of my reigns were being there to be king when the army came together. I really didn't have a lot to do about forming the army, but I was the inspiration man on the battlefield and off the field. I think, gosh, I'm thinking back. Who are the Dukes? And there's Jason and Kip. Like I said, I'm working on the castle a lot. I get down south maybe once a month, here and there for events. But Duke Adrian, he was really riding high when I first got back into the SCA in 1982. It would have been. I was ready to come back, finish the castle, fell in with a bunch of great guys in my hometown, and started SCAing again. Sir Kip Silverlock, he won one crown tournament again. He was just a great solid fighter. Free Wind, I love that man. And Ivan the Illustrated came on in the late 80s too, Duke Ivan. He was from Callantyr originally. He's back there now, but man, he was a great flamboyant fighter. And he'd wear big jingle bells on his ankles when he fought, so you heard him coming.
I think Duke Dietrich was probably a big one for the 80s as well.
Yeah.
Albeit a little later. But again, we still, we have Armand, who's done his second reign, and he's one of the people that pulled the Caidan army together and got people really going with fighter practices and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, again, Armand is another big influence in Caid. He's always been a big influence in Caid.
I call him the George Washington of Caid. He's just such a solid man. He always has great advice. He's given me a lot of good advice over the years. Yeah, that's going back. That's 40 years ago now, huh? The 80s. Wow. Well, I'm going to keep fighting until I can't fight anymore. I told some squires once. I said, "Hey, will you guys do me a favor?" They look at each other. Go, yeah, sure, guy. And I said, if I start stinking up that field, will you guys come out and get me? I don't want to stink up the
Hey,
field. But yeah, it's something I'll always love. Uh, another great thing about the '80s too, there were a lot of tournaments going on in Central Caid. You could wake up. I call Central Caid. It was just the Angels was the only barony in LA when I started. Now what is there, Larissa? Like 7 baronies there in the
no,
LA area.
yeah, in the LA area, there's 5 big baronies. Covers this
Yeah.
part of Southern California.
But you can wake up on a Saturday morning and say, "Oh, nice weather. Go to a tournament and have a choice of tournaments to go to."
Well, we're also landmass wise, you can drive from one end of Caid to the other in 9.5 hours. We're not, not counting Hawaii. That'll take you a lot longer to drive. But for the rest of it, it's pretty easy to get pretty much anywhere in Caid you want to go.
No, 8 hours from the north to the south. You could drive it in 8 hours. People have done it in 7, 6.5. I remember Atenvelt King telling me, their kingdom went from the Mexican border all the way to the Canadian border, and that they would drive 14 hours to an event, attend the event, turn around and drive all the way back 14 hours from Montana, which is Artemisia?
Artemisia now, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a great advantage too, is when your kingdom can be a little smaller, and then you get to know everybody in it instead of being so isolated or distant from each other.
Hey, Guy, what year did you back out of the SCA to start working on Castle Kirk?
That was 1980. I started it in the fall of 1980 and finished it 2 years later, moved in. That's the new part. The old castle, we moved in, it was concrete block walls and concrete floors. That's the keep, 30 feet high. Way over to the right is the old castle. That's a tower house with hexagon towers and diagonal corners.
Right.
And it took 2 years to get into it. And then I got a phone call from he's now Sir Joseph. He lives in Ontario, Count Joseph. And he is starting a branch of the SCA at the local junior college there. I was 24 at this time, and they were all just out of high school. And we fell into a pretty good friendship that still lasting for years. Yeah, that's a drone shot of the castle. The big silver box in the in the middle is the Great Hall. That's 1,000 square feet, and then the keep over on the left. I still have to pour that parapet wall, but the walls are 3 foot thick, and it's 30 feet high. And right now I'm building the workings for a dome on the ground floor for that keep. But the rest of the perimeter is done. It's very defendable, very secure. And
So were you a big, strong lad before this castle, or did start working on the castle make you such a big, strong lad?
I was a construction worker. I was always pretty strong, good shape. But I was a pipe layer, and that was a great foundation for dirt work and concrete work
Mm-hmm.
on building massive structures. And just fell into 2 acres, and it's been a labor of love since then. About 5 years into it, I walked out one morning and looked around and said, "Well, you stepped in it. Let's get this thing going on." And I've dedicated my life to it, and always have time for arts and time for being with Darla and also the family. That's become very important to me.
What Guy's not telling you guys is he also built a lot of his own tools to build the castle in a period manner in some cases. So
Right. Now, I'm a big fan of Duke Guy and his arts. I think some people can be a champion of the arts because they talk about the arts and they celebrate artists, but some people can be a champion of the arts by just living it every day. And I think that kind of defines Guy. I mean, and you got a personality guy that's sort of bigger than life, and so your art projects are bigger than life. You make a castle, you make helmets that are just some of the most amazing
Iconic.
enviable helmets of the SCA, and heck, when you make a coronet, I mean, it's ginormous. I mean, sometimes people laugh at it. It's like, look how big that coronet is. It's like, yeah, it is, but you know what? A secret? It weighs almost
Everyone,
nothing.
everyone wants one. Yeah,
Yep.
I made some big ones. Well, I saw a very large ducal coronet. I said, I'm gonna beat that one. So yeah,
But
it's been
I
fun.
love this larger than life mentality. I mean, you know, the SCA is perfect for that. And being a fighter through this period, I think it's a good example of where you can just sort of let you know, if you've got a bombastic personality and you love life and you love people and you love fighting, I mean, this has been a good time to be alive these last 30, 40 years.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've seen so much, learned so much.
And he's always
Yeah,
been that way.
you know,
Always been that
one
way.
thing I've always wondered, and I'm open to help anybody who wants to try to get a castle project started. Uh, most of Castle Kirk's built out of old sidewalk that's dumped on site, and that's half a building with masonry is getting material on site, and that's like an unlimited supply. Mixing mortar. I've learned so much about medieval concoctions of mixing mortar. They mix beer with the mortar. There's a bonding agent in the beer. The old flat stuff. They didn't mix the
Like,
good beer. Please tell me. Uh, anyway, yeah, I'm surprised I'm the only one I've heard of in the SCA that's taken on building a castle. And if you showed it to me 43 years ago when I started, I wouldn't have believed you. It's been more of a work in progress sculpture, like a giant sculpture of stone and steel and wood.
Yeah.
Uh,
And sweat and
oh, I'm
blisters and
yeah. I I have an outdoor shower, men's and women's, at the utility room, and I'll put on a t-shirt, swim trunks, and sandals, and just do cold water. Put on a dry bandana, and I'm good for a half hour when it's 103 degrees out there working. But something just keeps driving me and getting me stepping out that door every day. And I've got a saying: I can pick up one of 10 projects or start a new one. But always moving forward. I didn't build a helmet for 2.5 years while I worked on the finishing up the keep. Uh, the keep that one day at the keep was 105 yards of concrete, continuous pour, 11 trucks, and we just went up, filled the form, and it held. And that was a great day. Yeah, it held. And it's I don't know if you the technique or technical concrete terms, but it's 8.5 sacks of cement per cubic yard, where common concrete's 5 yards or 5 sacks per cubic yard. So this is like a military mix. U.S. bunkers. It'll take a crowd 88. I'm sure of it. So it's really neat to have that. It's not going to be really a living space. It'll be more like bunks with a catwalk above them for the windows, and that'll be for visiting fighters who come to the castle. You stay in the keep or up on the parapet. Got to do a cable slide from the top of that keep to the arena, huh? And do a harness and make an entrance in armor. Borrow Lucan's cape.
well, I definitely hope I get a chance to make it one year for the big thing you do there in the spring.
Yeah, yeah. the Festivus. Also, I'd
Yeah,
like to say after Great Western War, we have an open house, and
right.
a few people came up. I know a lot of people. It's out of the way for them. Some Westerners and Ontarians stopped by, but it's something everybody's welcome to see, and I'm very proud of it.
As you should be, and we are all very proud of you. Um, Your Excellency Larissa, are you still fairly active?
Yes.
Kind of a
I
laughable question, huh?
Yeah. Well, I've been a baronial seneschal in the last 10 years 6 times, and I'm the regalia officer again for the kingdom. I've been chamberlain for 8 different reigns now. Yeah, so I'm a deputy seneschal of the kingdom. Yeah, so definitely still active. My parents sort of passed on. We are the owners of the oldest freehold in the society, Griffin Freehold, and we're now the Right Noble Griffin Freehold. Some crazy person gave us that title. And we're still going. My parents basically handed over the reins to me, and I've been sort of the cruise director of it for the last 10 years. And
Hey, what's a freehold?
so we don't actually have voting. We don't have one person who's definitely in charge. Everything that we do is sort of voted on. New members are voted on, and it's basically there's no fealty. It's just my parents found the term and decided back in the 70s that sounded cool, and so that's why they called it a freehold. And we have 4 or 5 members now that actually belong to other households and other groups, and being a part of us doesn't interfere with any of that because we don't require fealty and we don't have any actual ties officially that way. We're
Hmm.
kind of a break glass in case of emergency for a lot of people. So yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. And it has been just a tremendous pleasure to have you both on with us and allow us to pick your brains and to poke at your memory and get these really cool stories. My face hurts from smiling because both of you, I think, have an infectious sort of bubbling personality of just the joy that you have found in the SCA still comes out of you today. And I think that's probably one of the most amazing things I've seen in a long time is the longevity of the joy that is very evident in the both of you.
Well, thank you. I think that's the important part. Like I tell people all the time, if you're not having at least 60% of a good time, because there is work, right? You're either a participant or a consumer. So if you're a participant, there's work. So there's going to be some times where maybe it's not so great, but hopefully you've got someone with you that you're having fun with, right? And that's what we try to do. Many hands makes light work. And if you're not having that much fun, then you're doing something wrong. Either you're with the wrong people, or you're volunteering too much, or you might need an attitude adjustment, or maybe we're just not the right group for you. But hopefully we can find some place that finds you happiness, because that's what I liked about it. This was for a lot of people, this is something that they just do on the weekends, and for me, this is my family. This is part of my home, and I will defend it with my last dying breath. So
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere.
Well, you're definitely talking to a couple of lifers here. So
Yeah.
we get it.
Yeah, I think we're all in. We're all in. Yeah, Larissa's just been such a great foundation of Caid for years and years. Always there for everybody. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. And yeah, to all of you watching this, just stay positive, stay creative anachronism to what ideas can you come up with to make our society classier and better? And I love seeing the improvements. I'm isolated when I go to an event. It's like a reunion for me. It really is. And getting ready to go over to Hawaii to fight some Australians here next month. There's a big symposium over there. But I have a message for all the combatants of the known world. If you ever see me at a war or at a tournament, fight me.
Fight me.
Okay, you're on,
Oh.
guy.
Brennan, get us out of here. We've been at this too long.
All right. Well, thanks to our guests, Duke Guy and Viscountess Larissa. Next week, as it says on the bottom of the screen, we have concepts from the Book of Five Rings, and that's Al-Anon. I'm Brennan. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Heroes and Traditions. Good night, y'all.
Long live Caid!
Woo!
We'll see ya.